Oh, hey there, how you doing?
Yar, do you be searching for a D&D play podcast?
Join us as we sail across the high seas.
It be a heroine horror campaign inspired by piracy and Lovecraftian tales.
To Whom the Sea Belongs is the first campaign of the Kaleidosphere podcast.
Yes, that's kale, like the vegetable. IDO, sphere, wherever podcasts are found, yes.
Tabletopped is brought to you by the following sponsor.
Are you looking for something comfortable to wear and keep your brain warm while playing tabletop games? Daily Dose of Yarn makes handmade, customized beanies for all of your style and comfort needs. She can even help you with a custom beanie to represent your favorite character. Check out Daily Dose of Yarn on Instagram and Etsy to order your new favorite beanie today.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Tabletop. Today we are going to talk about sandboxes. They're not just for kids anymore. Also, we're going to be talking about some video game stuff too, because that is where sort of the term comes from, and a lot of design elements come from that. So be ready. It's not just for TTRPGs. But with me today, I have three of my bestest friends. Who are all of you?
It's me, Franco.
It's also me, Coronor.
And it's me, Shade.
Awesome. I'm so glad to have you guys all here because all three of you are DMs who have run some sort of sandboxy type of campaign with me before. I have also apparently ran a couple of sandboxes. We were talking right before the podcast started, and I was like, I've never done it, and then it turned out I had. So we're all gonna talk about that experience. But first, let's just start with defining terms. What is a sandbox, and what is sort of like a sandbox campaign when it comes to a TTRPG?
So a sandbox, in general, as you said at the top, comes from video game nomenclature, and it's this idea that you give a player this this box of sand, and they can, and then they can make a mess. No, you're giving them all the tools that they need to build a world around them, and it really comes from games like The Sims, SimCity, originally, and then it expanded into things like the Grand Theft Auto series, the Elder Scrolls series, and more things like that.
Yeah, definitely. It's also interesting because there are certain things, there's a style of gameplay that comes with it too that I feel like different players turn to. So like the one style is I'm going to create a very fully fleshed world with a narrative around me, because like in the Dark Souls series there's like a lot of lore to find, right? And there's a lot of stuff to like read into, but there's also a style of play that's just very technical as well, and I think that both of those play styles have a place here. But when you're making a sandbox, what are the things that you're considering to encourage one style of play or another?
So I actually I will address that, I'm sure the others will as well, but I just wanted to say I didn't note one thing. I spoke really kind of to an open world aspect when I said Grand Theft Auto and Skyrim, but Minecraft, for example, is another version of sandbox because you're literally creating things. But open world is really where a lot of people think when they hear the word sandbox, and because you mentioned Dark Souls, the actual Dark Souls games, I think, are more on the rails in some respects, whereas Elden Ring, for example, is that open world experience, or it aims to be. So when I am building a sandbox for my players to play in, one of the things that I really want to give them is a map. You need to start a sandbox with a very well fleshed out map, because they need to have something to look at and go, I want to go there and there and there, and what the fuck is that? And oh my gosh, what does it mean, this hand that's rising out of the ocean on the map? Why is that depicted? And things like that.
Yeah, I would say with the map thing too, like, so I don't know if this is what you mean, Shade, but the way that I introduced, so I'm running a sandbox campaign, or very sandbox-like campaign, and the maps that I gave the players were very, like, it looks like it's from the world. Like, here's some illustrations, here's the Tower of Glass, and then here's the Here's like the Snarlwood, which I stole from Daniel. Thanks, Daniel. And then here's like a calcified god on top of a mountain. Feel free to steal that one. And it's like, and one of the players immediately latched onto it and was like, my character is obsessed with the dead god on the mountain and wants to learn everything about it. And I was like, great.
Yeah, that's one of the key features is always, good map making, because you want to draw them away from where they want to go. You also want to make sure that you're starting them in a place where they can kind of feel safe and get their bearings. So you want like a good sort of hub, camp, city, or just some place for them to start where they can take a moment, get their bearings, find supplies and everything like that, so they don't feel just dropped on their own.
There's a school of thought with that too, where like we can talk about West Marches at some other point probably, but like the idea that like nothing like the city is boring, like the town is boring, nothing happens there, you just go in there to get supplies. But you can also think about it, you can think about like political things or like adventures that are happening in town, can also be fun. You don't have to do it all out in the wilderness.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that along with the map sort of idea is defining scope. Because I think that really helps decide what kind of game you want to play when it comes to what the characters are going to be doing from day to day. Like in my Lakewood campaign, it was a sandbox, but it was like a town, and it was a pretty small town at that. So like it didn't take very long for all of the players to get from one side of the map to the other side. But there's like a lot of things happening inside, and the players were sort of expected to think that they were more important, in contrast to like a West Marches type stuff where you have lots of towns, but also this like huge, like wild, untamed wilderness that you're also expected to go into an adventure with. And by defining that scope differently, it's kind of asking the players to focus on different parts of the campaign as well.
So one of the things that I think maybe might be helpful, because I hear all of this and I go, well, gosh, that sounds like every TTRPG I've played in. What is, I mean, we're making solid points, I feel. I'm going to toot my own horn here, folks.
We're all
but,
right.
we're all
being
right.
really
yeah,
smart
we're really
right now.
smart guys. That's why you're listening. Thanks. But no, the thing is, what is the distinction between an open world or sandbox game and one that is not, one that is more contained in some fashion? So what would you say?
I would say that, like, for me, the antithesis to a sandbox is a dungeon crawl, because then there is a route, and there is one right route to go to get to the end of this dungeon. Or maybe there's multiple routes, but all of them lead to the same place. And this is also one of the reasons why I was like, did I run a sandbox campaign? Because there was the town, and everything that happened was fairly dynamic depending on what you guys did. But I always sort of assumed that you wouldn't cause the apocalypse. And so in that way, I was able to sort of plan a narrative arc that was, satisfying. But like, that's what my answer would be something like a dungeon where there is a map that is defined, and it's more of a route rather than a area, I guess.
I think I guess I could agree with that, but I think you can definitely play like a sandboxy like dungeon. Like there's a lot of ways to throw in random encounters in dungeons and stuff depending on how you're playing it.
I would say the difference would be, are the players deciding what they're going to do, or are the NPCs giving them, I need this task done, and the story doesn't progress until you've done this or you've failed at this for me.
Right, it's the plots versus situations.
Yeah.
Like you want to set up situations, you don't. I mean, I think generally a lot of times, the general advice will be to set up situations and not plots, like not like shoving them into like a story that you're trying to tell, but giving them like different hooks and stuff for different situations that you have. Like there's a bandit king here who's like, stealing stuff from people or whatever. And then,
Yeah, I think we did this when I was running a Barovia campaign. Mm-hmm. There was an NPC in one of the villages. Forgive me, I can't remember. I think it was Valaki. But she was sort of like a well-to-do, wealthy noble who was inviting the PCs to a dinner, which was part of a quest line. But because the story didn't depend on them going to that dinner or not going to that dinner, that was sort of like unresolved for a very long time because they could go other places, see other people, do other things. And I think that is what gives it a sandboxy feel, where if you're playing in a more linear game, it would be this character gives you a quest. You have to make a decision about what you're going to do right now.
Right. And you know, with that, you brought up something else that I think hallmarks the sandbox, and that is side quests. If you don't have a billion things on your to-do list as a player character, you probably aren't in a sandbox, in my opinion.
But can we talk about that a little bit? Because side quests are so interesting to me because they can fill like a really interesting role in a group dynamic of like allowing characters to grow in different ways and to find what's important to them individually and like get attached to the world. All very positive things. But they can also, like you said, make a to-do list that everyone is like, okay, before we go to this place or whatever, we have to wrap up some of these quest lines, and like that doesn't feel very immersive. That feels sort of, you know, very video gamey, where you have a checkbox that you have to check. So what do you guys feel about that? Is that like okay, or do you?
I ran into that problem a lot when I was running the Gilded Canaries campaign, because it was all about fighting these generals in this army and saving the country, but I had a lot of other stuff that I also like wanted the party to explore and experience, but a lot of it was like, no, this is the thing. We gotta do this next thing.
In your wrap-up emails, like the recaps and everything, you literally had a list of open quest lines that we had at the bottom of the emails, which is like one of the ways that we were all keeping track of what we had to do.
So, I mean, I do agree. Again, sandbox is really it comes out of video games in many regards. So I think that side quests do make it feel in some ways less immersive and more gamey, but there is an important aspect to that making it succeed in a sandbox setting, and that is literally putting timelines on those things, and deadlines and things like that, because that's life. Life is full of things that I want to do every single second. But do I want to do it more than just sleep in my bed or something like that? And you've got to make those choices. And the fact that things continue on without the presence of the characters makes it a sandbox.
Well, I think you can definitely. So I was thinking of like the Curse of Strahd game, and I think I did read the book at some point, not while Daniel was running it. But there is this idea where there's like this like sun festival or something like that, and it always happens when the characters show up. Sorry if that's a spoiler for Curse of Strahd, but like it only happens when the characters show up, and that's when it happens. Like you can depending on how you want your game to go or like what you think is interesting or important, like you can freeze some stuff in time while letting the clock run on other things. Where you're just like, well, they haven't like encountered this yet, but like I guess technically, like at this point, like don't think about it like that, because like the players aren't going to know, like just do whatever you think might be most interesting. And if the most interesting thing is somebody asks you for help for something, and then like 2 weeks later you haven't done anything about it, and it gets worse, then that's gonna be more interesting than if you're like, oh, I was just waiting here for you.
Yeah, a way to do that is to just straight up steal from Monster of the Week the Doomsday counter, where it has like a clock that starts as soon as the mystery begins, and things get worse as things go on. You don't have to make things get worse, but like maybe plan out sort of if the characters do not interfere in anything when it comes to this story hook that you're offering. How does it end? Like in Red Dead Redemption 2, there's a really great quest where you can go and like teach a woman how to hunt, and then like teach her how to like be a survivalist because her husband has recently died. But if you never go back there to like finish teaching, she's just a skeleton the next time you go back. So like there is, I think that is a really good way to sort of make the world feel alive, is to just introduce these kind of timers for yourself to see what is happening.
Another good way to like also like the timers are also a good way to increase the difficulty as the campaign goes on. Like if you're like, oh, they haven't picked up this quest line at all, you know, okay, now they've gotten up to level 5. Like they could have picked up this quest line at level 1, but now they're level 5. Let's move this along, and now like there's a bigger threat or like a bigger type of threat.
Here's something that I've experimented with, and I'm not gonna like go into details about it because I've never really felt like it's really worked. But the Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition has the CR counters, which is like, okay, use this for this monster. And then they also in the DMG give you some guides for modifying CRs a little bit. So what I will do if I'm running a quest or if I have a monster that I want the players to face, I won't lock it in at a level. I'll be like, this is going to be challenging, so it's going to be whatever the party level is +3. Or this should be fairly simple, so it's going to be whatever the party's level is -2. And that way you sort of keep the scale going with the players so that that way you don't feel like you have to lock them into doing things at level 1. If they miss this, they're going to be overpowered later. You have to kind of keep the game scaling to your party too.
Or don't and just fuck them, because you just show up and you're like, hey, I rolled a random encounter, I'm level 1, there's a dragon overhead, but maybe that dragon doesn't attack you, but it's just kind of there or whatever. You know, I think Danny, before we started, you know, we were talking about like encounters that aren't just fighting, you know, like if you just,
I think in a good sandbox you should definitely have storytelling through encounters and not just encounters as combat or encounters as pass-fail sort of skill checks. You should be able to encounter things that sort of invest you in the world as you go or tell you more about things.
Yeah.
Like, I think that I tried one time, and I can't remember how it fell out, but I had invented an animal for the plains of Western Theranon, the world that I'm running in. And I just wanted to introduce it to the party without having like, oh, you get attacked by this new monster. So I had it hunting beside where the party was traveling.
Wait, were those the birds?
The Remiornes, yeah. So I was like, yeah, you can also like use that. Here's some creatures that exist in this world. They're not attacking you right now. It's not a combat encounter, but you can watch them hunt, or you watch this event unfold while your party is like exploring the world.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example of another thing that keeps sandboxes, that makes sandboxes what they are. You want your descriptions to be broad. You want to really describe as much as you can, whereas in a more linear game, you know, you're guiding them through you enter the room and you see XYZ, and that's it, just the XYZ. Instead, when you're in a sandbox, you probably are going to see, you know, maybe the whole alphabet or more than just 3 things to give players an opportunity. And that is a heavy load to put on.
Yeah, this is actually something I really want to talk about, because right now I'm running a dungeon that is not a sandbox. But the way that I GM, just in any game I ever GM, is literally like, I say this very often to no effect, but just try whatever you want and I will tell you what can happen from that. Like, be creative, do whatever. But I think that also provides like quite a heavy load for the players, because then they're like, I guess I can do anything, but it kind of sounds like I'm supposed to do something specific. And like, what am I supposed to do? Like, sometimes they can feel directionless, or maybe they just don't want to take a leap that you're expecting or something. And that is something I feel like every party struggles with in a sandbox at some point or another, where everyone's like, okay, we just did this thing. What do we do now? And like, that is something, if you like, just speak on it, because I always struggle with figuring out how to get people to like smoothly or fluidly transition themselves into the next thing that they're interested in.
You need hooks.
Yeah,
hooks and rumors. And the way to build them out is, I feel kind of bad. I actually just watched a video last night about this particular topic from the Alexandrian, who's like a really, really great like blogger, and it's like a video from him as well. But I mean, I don't know if people aren't familiar with his work, like he's amazing. But he was saying that when you build out a situation, like when you have like your bandit king who's like, you know, like the hooks can be all kinds of stuff. Like if you build out this complicated situation where you have like a bandit king and he's using skeletons from a local necromancer and stuff, like you can get like all the hooks can be stuff like there's been bandit incursions, or there's a rumor about this like temple that he stationed himself out at, or there's been skeletons seen like around around this area and stuff like that. And so like when you build out the situation, just think about all the little things that could like leak out from that, and then the things that people could conceivably tell the players about.
And I think that's a really good example of how you would do it narratively. But I think that sometimes you can just provide a rail in a sandbox. There's really nothing that takes it away from being a sandbox if you occasionally just put rails for the players to go on. And a good example from this, from a video game standpoint, is the Elder Scrolls series. I have played every single one. I loved them dearly. They meant quite a lot to me for a good portion of my life. And a lot of people who have been steeped in that series for a long time will say Morrowind is the best of them because it's a true sandbox. It drops you into this situation. It gives you a journal. You have a map, but there is no wayfinding. There's no compass marker that says go this direction. And then that has gradually changed over the years with Oblivion and then Skyrim, where there is more directed, hey, you've got this quest and here's where you go next on the quest. And those are rails. And while that does in some respect take away from that sandbox, there is value to that. Sometimes your players just are not going to pick up on your hooks. Sometimes they really need someone to directly come to them and go, hey, I'm having this issue. And there's still the power for the player to say, no, I don't care about that issue, and go away from it.
It's also important to work with your players about like their motivations and like things that they want, like their goals. And that can help out like with creating hooks for different things. Like this is the type of thing I like, or I like protecting the innocent, so I would help against those bandits, or I like looting ancient temples or whatever, so I'm going to do that. Yeah, and maybe not having so many rails, but you definitely want to outline where your boundaries are going to be for a sandbox. So I think we just had this, well, not problem, but I'd like to do post-campaign surveys. I've just did one for my Gilded Carries campaign, which was very open sandboxy. I think I had like an entire continent, like 5 different like regions of a world map to be explored and visited, in cities and towns, and very open. One of the things I included in this campaign were obelisks that just floated over important cities, and I never really explained them. And I think in this sort of sense, you can do too much in a sandbox that will overwhelm your players and not really like give them too many options. And what is that? Decision paralysis. There's just too many things to do that they don't really know what would affect the story the best. So I think you also want to make sure that you're not open-ending things too much in a sandbox. You want to make sure that if not rails, definitely like keep an eye and make sure you don't have more than like 5 to 10 open quests. Like I think at a particular time, find a way as a DM to like wrap some stuff up so that your to-do list doesn't become like overwhelming. I think with that campaign too, like we had an objective, which was to destroy like this, malevolent entity. And so anything that took us away from that, we would usually consider a distraction, I think. And so like it's kind of about like trying to balance like, okay, what is the, like how I think it may be like a difficulty just with higher level play where you're just like, because I think that we were like 15 to 20. And so it's like, yeah, like we're going to save the world, and there's a bunch of routes to it. And so like making them feel like fairly equivalent routes is helpful, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it's interesting too. I think that maybe giving yourself a little bit of a break too, and having the beginning set up, but also as a storyteller, if you are running a game that you have a narrative plan for, but still want to leave it open, maybe have like an end that you have in mind, not an ending like this is what's going to happen, but like the final big issue that they're going to have to solve in mind, so that you can plan all of these other things that are in the world and have them peripheral to this big thing that you're like, okay, also we have this big issue that needs to be solved, because that's like the main force of the campaign. The narrative arc is more on that that storyline as well.
Yeah, and to steal something from the Adventure Zone, I think mostly in there the balance arc from the first run that they did. When you're telling your story and you have your big campaign and you want it to be soapboxed, maybe put in like interlude sections for your game. Like, okay, we've done some story. Now the DM explains to the players that we're kind of in an interlude to do some exploring. Nothing's going to be too important. We're not going to progress this other storyline for a while. And that gives your players like sort of the signal to like, okay, you don't have to keep focused on the main story. Now's your chance to explore and do the side quest and the other things.
So I did that during our Westwood campaign, short-lived as it was, but there was a couple lunar interludes, I call them, where you were able to just kind of explore the city and do what you guys wanted to do. How do you think that worked? Did it work well? Did you guys like that? I don't really know.
So I thought that worked well, and unlike, I don't know the machinations of Griffin McElroy. Perhaps he intended Balance to be open world sandbox. I don't think it was.
I don't think it was.
I was stealing that idea, remodified.
But it's good because it led into Nick's Lunar Interludes, which that was an open world game that was used effectively, I thought, because while it was an open world game, and we did all sorts of wild stuff. Like we had one moment where we were going to deal with the monster, and my character went to try and figure some things out about that monster, and two other characters went to, one, very kindly repair my weapon, but two, rob a Best Buy. And that was completely open world, off the rails, doing whatever. But it was nice to have those specific moments of, okay, there is nothing going on right now quest-wise. There's no impending doom. Take a moment, breathe, explore the world.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because it's like we had this sort of sandbox-like moment in between what I think were definitely like very, very like this is a plot, mysteries in between. Like I think the world of Lakewood, like the Monster of the Week game that Nick ran, was definitely like we could explore and we could do a lot of things, but it was everything we did was, we had to think about like there is the ticking clock of this like main plot that is happening. And I think a lot of times people, like if you think about a sandbox, like I think that's a sandbox for sure, but then I don't know, like there's also like the hex crawl aspect of it where it's like much more player directed. Like the Lakewood mysteries were like, we have to solve these mysteries and, or I guess we could not and the world ends, which is like, not a great option. But then like, if you're wanting to talk about like player directed play and giving them this sandbox to play in and find out what their plots are on their own, like, I think that's like, I don't know. I feel like it's different.
It is. I think that. I'm sorry. I think that there are levels of sandbox.
Yeah, for sure.
And I would say the hex crawl is the largest, most open-ended of them, and the one you would aspire to. But that also isn't for everyone, because I think that with a hex crawl, you're going to need a lot of randomized tables, and that can be fun, but after a while, you kind of hunger, maybe some people might hunger for, okay, well, I want something more, an arc instead of just the randomness of it all.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull into two other video games that I've played somewhat recently that are sandboxy and kind of give you like this sort of hand on the wheel exploration phase. Spider-Man, the game for the PS4, is a way that you could do that, in which you had the whole city of Manhattan to explore, and you could do whatever you wanted. and oftentimes you're getting calls or whatever. It's like, this is the next story element when you come and check out this building here. And then on your way, you could do as much as you wanted, and it wouldn't continue without you. So like that goes back to the thing we talked about before with the Festival of the Sun. Like, you should have some things in your game that wait on the party, and then let them do things that are progressing as they go. And another recently like open world I've played is Days Gone, which gives you the state of Oregon to like just take your motorcycle back through. And that also gives you the chance to sort of like things sort of wait on you to do them. But sometimes you have to complete missions in one story to get the other stories to trigger forward. Right. And it lets you keep track of like 20 different ongoing like character interactions that were happening. So you could also do something like that to give your players rails to explore on, but also that freedom that it won't happen until you do this, and this, that you really have to worry about this getting away from you.
I want to take a sharp left turn, unless anybody wants to go off of that.
No, let's go. Left.
Left.
We've decided in the sandbox to turn left. If you are running like a hex crawl or really anything that is like a sandbox where you want some like random encounters and stuff, one hot tip that I have is to not just have like, here's a list of monsters or creatures or whatever to encounter. I think it's also helpful to have like a list of like additional tables for different complications. So to, you know, the one way I've used this is I've recently my players were on their way to go to a dungeon, and I rolled a random encounter for them as they were traveling, and they found on the side of the road what I rolled, which was 3 soldiers, so like usually friendly, you know, like they're not going to be attacking them or anything, and I rolled that they were dead, and that they were, I forget what the last one was, but probably patrolling or scouting. And so like the 2 different like, so like the tables that I have are an activity and then a complication. And so I had these guys patrolling and they're dead. And then I said, okay, I know there's giants in the area. So they were found with like a boulder nearby, and their armor is crushed and stuff. And so that is like a world building thing that the characters were able to encounter, where they were like, okay, there are soldiers here from our kingdom, and they were killed by, it looks like they were killed by giants. And so the players are then like, what do we do? And I'm like, I don't know. What do you do? Like, they like investigate the bodies. They try to figure out how they died. And they say like, okay. And then that's kind of like a way to let them know like, hey, there's giants out here. Like it's a sort of oblique way of like putting in that world building. So I definitely recommend doing that because it's more fun than just being like, okay, just a couple of bandits show up and they definitely want to like rob you. And it's like, well, these bandits are here and they're bringing back a haul of gold from people they just robbed, or these bandits are here and they're fishing, you know. You know, it's like, I don't know, I think there's different ways to like complicate these situations so that it doesn't feel all samey.
It's very like Witcher 3, where you come into a town and it's just empty, one building's on fire, and then there's just like a tree with a bunch of people hanging from it, and you're like, okay.
Yeah, that's world building.
I think it's another like fun complication that you could add into these games is like weather events and disasters. Like, oh, the party goes from this town to this other town rather frequently, and then you roll on a table for weather. There's an earthquake. Now you do like a landslide or something, and what? Now they can't use this path anymore. Do they try to solve for that? Do they create a new path? It gives your players a way to interact with the world that's not, you have to kill this monster or defeat this person in some ways. Like, shit just happens. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's a game that my friend was designing that you were a defeated army that was in enemy territory, and the enemy folks had said, we're gonna let you go, because it was like politically good of being like, look how like merciful we are, we're gonna let them all go. But they take the eyes out of every soldier except for 10, which would be the player characters would be of that 10, and the game would mostly be trying to get the rest of this like platoon home to the right kingdom. and the actual mechanics of traveling with a bunch of people who are not able to function in the way they used to, and like how do you cross like a bridge that is like slightly broken down and has like holes in it and stuff with like 1,000 people who can't see very well and things like that. It was like making traveling the main part of it rather than the end points of traveling.
I would hate that.
I was gonna say, I'm sure that this is going to be a lot of fun, but also it sounds immediately like your friend made Companion Quest the game.
Yeah, so it's interesting because what he wanted to do with it was make it a big sandbox, and like the enemy soldiers or whatever gave you 3 flags of their kingdom that would get you out of situations on the way home. Like as long as you were flying the flags, then people wouldn't touch you within their territory. But if you were to be found breaking the law or attacking a settlement or doing something that was generally decided as bad, they would take one of your flags. And so like you had essentially 3 chances to try to get through this place without someone taking all your flags. And it was about kind of like trying on ideologies. Like, do you slowly become an authoritarian group where like there is one leader and this is what we do? Or is it a thing like a democracy where you're polling all of the soldiers that don't really have an active role in making these decisions because they have less information from not being able to see? Or like, what do you do? And there are different like sections within the platoon that do different things. Like there's the engineering group, and then there's like the soldier group, and there's like the ones that were in charge of rations and stuff. And so there was like a bunch of different competing interests that you have to manage. So it was all about trying to like make choices that would then inform your real life views of like political ideologies, I guess.
What if I just take off my insignia and armor and I just go home by myself? They can figure it out.
Well, the thing is that if you just like take off your insignia and everything and leave, then you're not going to have the protection of the 3 flags.
Yeah, but are they going to know that I'm a foreigner?
Well,
I don't know why I'm.
You're already like, okay,
let's argue into the logistics of this other game.
This tangent was brought to you by this other game. So that does sound really interesting. And that second description went from escort quest, not companion. I meant escort.
Okay.
Escort quest to mob management, which is more interesting and more my speed. But one of the things I wanted to ask you too about, well, all 3 of you, but I think really more Franco and Daniel on this. Tables are a really cool part of, can be a really cool part of an open
It's half of the title of this podcast.
That's right. An open world or sandbox game.
Yes.
How do you 2 use them? Because personally, I find them rather clunky in the middle of the game.
Yeah, I remember asking your advice about this at some point too. Go ahead, Danny.
I have the charts, and I like to pre-roll before a session to have these random things.
Yeah, that's
it's still randomized, but I have it prepped and ready to go, so I'm not in the middle of something trying to figure out how it's just going to work. It gives me a chance to actually have it and look at it, but it's still session to session randomly determined.
Right. It's so that way, if you want to use my cool complications activity system, you can pre-roll all of you just have some pre-rolls. But yeah, that's the advice that Shade gave me. Another thing you could do is if you have any programming skills, you can make a little program. I just made like a JavaScript page, and I just click a button, and then it tells me whether there's an encounter depending on where the players are, and then it lets me know all the other stuff.
And in addition to the Java, I mean, there are a lot of resources out there that allow you to do that. Online tables are 100% easier to use because they're usually just a quick Google search away. So that is one thing that I do. If I need it in the middle of a game, I will usually pull one up online and just do that.
Here's the thing about...
I'm a control freak.
Here's the thing about me when I run a game is that I'm so obsessed, and you guys have heard me rag on about this with like tempo and the narrative voice of a session, that anytime and this is going to the pre-rolling and everything, I would very much suggest it, because if I'm a player in a game and someone says, hold on 1 second, you're traveling and I hear dice clatter and then they're like, oh, wolves or whatever. I'm like, oh, so this doesn't matter because it was generated in the moment, doesn't really like have anything to do with what we're doing. This is just like an added complication. And also, especially if it is a roll in the moment, and it leads to a monster, then everyone's like, okay, let's stop down, let me find the stat block for these monsters, and like let's get ready to run this little thing. And I feel like that just like is killer for tempo for me. It's just like, oh man, like we were getting somewhere and now we're stopping to fight some wolves that nobody really knew that were there.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to a little bit what Daniel was talking about, where every encounter that you encounter doesn't have to be a combat encounter.
Yeah, truly.
But yes, I do get that, and I think definitely with a game like D&D, that can definitely be more of a stalling point. But if you have like a more simple game, you know, even like Monster of the Week, if you somehow put random tables in Monster of the Week, which feels a little weird, but I guess you could. You know, it's probably just much easier because of how the mechanics of the game are. I guess if you had it like in Dungeon World, which is like more, you know, closely more similar to D&D, but also has like the Powered by the Apocalypse, you know, sort of like quick roll, start doing stuff, like you roll, it attacks you too. You know, good luck.
Yeah, I guess you could always, if you wanted to do, and maybe this is the way to do it, is that you could invite a little bit of that feeling into your D&D game by saying like, hey, this like the random encounter that you have created has like 3 wolves or whatever, and you're just like, hey everybody, we're not rolling initiative or anything, but 3 wolves have come out of the forest and are like waylaying the like cart that you guys have been in. Like, what are you guys going to do about it? And it doesn't even have to be a combat thing. It can just be like, hey, we, you know, throw a thing of meat out into the woods or whatever.
Yeah, that's why rolling for initiative sucks. I think that I think the thing that you just like I think like, yeah, combat, it's a little slow and blah blah blah, but it is exciting. But rolling for initiative is boring. Like that takes a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've often thought about trying to do a thing where everyone has like a passive initiative score based on like their dex score, their dex modifier and 10. But then people kind of get like, oh, but then I'm never going to go first. I'm always going to be last. Yeah. So it's hard to balance that.
You can also do there's other ways of doing. I've been dabbling in looking at OSR rules. Which is the old school revival, which is like basically trying to go back to the original D&D rules and stuff like that. Which
I love that old school revival just sounds like a church thing.
Oh my god, it does. The old school revival.
My mind immediately went to you know, when people like when YouTube was young would do those like Naruto music videos, like, and they were called like OMF
AMVs.
AMVs.
AMVs. Yeah. I was there for that.
Sick ref. And a lot of OSR games, it's just okay, you roll for initiative every round, but it's a side-based initiative. And then it's like I'm rolling, you know, if the monsters roll higher, you just roll a d6 or whatever, and it's just a straight d6. And if you roll lower than, if you roll 1 through 3, then you go second. If you roll, 4 to 6, you go first. And then you just re-roll it every turn in that way, or you just alternate, or, whatever. And then it's like, it does kind of mess with the D&D rules as well, though, because, there's turns are important in D&D. Yeah. So if you can get past that and start hacking your game, if you start hacking your game, then you can do stuff. Just don't take that feat that gives you
plus 10 to your
yeah. Just don't.
Well, this is the thing, is that Daniel's idea of having a passive, right? You could just make rolling initiative the DM rolling one, yes, exactly. And then you have the list of where everyone goes in initiative. You roll, and that whatever you roll is where you start your initiative. So if you roll a 6, then it starts at 6, and then everyone who has less than that will go, and then it'll go back up to 20 and then go down. You know what I mean? So there are ways to do it that you could speed up initiatives.
Yeah, I also did a hero villain initiative order, and it was just a roll off between the two parties. and then everyone on one side would go, and then everyone on the other side.
Yeah, it sounds very much like the OSR.
Yeah. I guess you could alternate as well. Like you could just say like, okay, one side rolls, the other side rolls, and then all the monsters. And
Also seemed like a very complicated pattern that gives like speed cost to attacks and spells, and that would just
like
you would go, and then it
spells
would
go last.
spells go last, or if you want to use like all 3 attack actions, you like go down in the initiative order like 6 spaces, but everyone's constantly moving down, so the turns go in random order.
Work.
It's a lot more.
So anyway, sandboxes.
No, let's talk about initiative more.
All I said was initiative sucks.
Yeah, we should just lock that entire conversation for a different episode for later.
That's true. That's a good idea.
No, you're gonna live with it, listener. I'm so sorry.
Break it here. Here's the cut.
No, but as far as sandbox and initiative goes, I will say you can. No, I actually don't have anything for this. I'm trying to politely tie it together, but I got nothing for that. I'm sorry.
No, I just think that for me, the thing that I was talking about that kind of tied them together was that tempo is really important to me because I'm just like a story snob. So like getting like a tempo of a sandbox campaign to match the tempo of something that's a little bit more on rails is like something that I struggle with. Even like I don't use tables because often I'll just be like, okay, they're like, I know my world, I know where they are, and I'm just gonna be like, okay, in this area this happens, and I'm just gonna say that this is while you're driving you see like a dark figure in the woods looking out. It's only for a second, but you see it as you pass by. What do you guys want to do? Like I feel like the narrative voice is very powerful, and what you're asking whenever you roll something on a table or whenever you give those kind of traveling descriptions is, I am offering you a chance to stop what you're doing and investigate something else. And that is going to take time in a limited time session that we have tonight. Do you want to spend the resource of your player time to investigate this other thing, or is this just going to be something that passes by but adds to the world a little bit?
Wait, but isn't that what you just described? Your example was also that. Like,
yeah, no, what I'm saying is like that's what it feels like, and going back to what you both were advocating for, which is they don't always have to be combat. Yeah. Like I would also add to that they don't always have to be interacted with. Yeah. Like people could go by and like in your example of the soldiers, like they could just see like mangled, crushed up, tin cans of soldiers on the side of the road and be like, shit, we should keep going. Like, let's go a little faster.
That's the problem too, though, is like player curiosity is always there. Yeah. Like they're always going to be curious no matter what. So it's like, how do you balance that with like, because like that's a world building aspect,
Fear.
It's, like, it's just like and you hear giant footsteps like coming towards you basically.
Yeah, and
that's like, you should go.
Yeah, that's just environmental storytelling, and a lot of like things do that. Where it's like you're not supposed to interact with it. You're supposed to see it, absorb it, and then move on.
But the supposed to is the problem.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, and I was gonna say in the case of player curiosity in a sandbox game, encourage it. Right. Let them be curious. Let them die. That's kind of the point of a sandbox game.
But also, like Elden Ring, I think does this really well in that it always rewards curiosity, and that you look at something, you're like, I think I could get up there. And you try for like 10 hours or whatever, and you finally make it up there, and you're like, wow, there's a really cool sword here. Or like there's a little gravestone that says this little bit of lore that I can slurp up. Like, I feel like that is the thing you have to do within sandbox games, as well as like make everything that they choose to do the most interesting, important thing that they could have chose to do, or else you're punishing curiosity.
Yeah.
It's really rude to slurp your lore.
I mean, I wanted to talk about this just as an aside. Playing with you in Elden Ring is a nightmare because every time we find lore, it's just like, gah!
Listen, I grew up on Go-Gurt. I gotta slurp it on up.
Anyway, but no, I think that's a really good... I think that's a really good point, is that you want to reward the curiosity. You also want to threaten the curiosity. But when you're not playing in a sandbox and you're playing something that's more on the rails, that's where you need to really kind of enforce the supposed to. And, I'm going to just throw out, I run this Waterdeep campaign for you all. It started with the...
Dragon Heist.
Dragon Heist, thank you. Dragon Heist. Dragon Heist is very linear. I mean, there's, like any D&D or any TTRPG game, there are moments for the more open world aspects, but it's very linear.
We found a ghost in a bar.
Yeah, but that's literally written into the book,
rail,
and that is part of the rail. And, and its sequel is Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which as a dungeon can be sandboxy, but it's pretty linear because there are prescribed things. We're now, as we get into this new campaign with this crew, going to be moving towards character-focused things that are just going to be me homebrewing and taking things from, established Forgotten Realms lore and things like that, and working with you on your characters and just doing that. And I think that that's another thing you can do with Sandboxes, because while I expect that we'll mostly stay in Waterdeep, a single city, we're not going to be worried about, well, the world's about to end, or we have this one specific enemy right now. And if we do, they're going to be fairly momentary things, because I'm more interested in seeing what shenanigans your characters want to get up to. And that's another style of sandbox.
I've never been pro shenanigan as a player.
That's such bullshit. You started
The biggest lie I've ever heard.
You started a riot on the streets because you thought that the cops were like being too rough on you.
They accused me of a crime with no evidence. That's not a shenanigan. That's just standing up for my civil rights.
That's ACAB. That's justice. That's what Balance said.
ACAB for sure, but there is a rule of law, and your character definitely was operating outside of it.
Yeah, but they didn't know that for a fact, was my point.
Suspect is enough to question you. Anyway, this aside is brought to you by Waterdeep.
Valen is like a hardcore libertarian.
Oh, God.
Hardcore. Hardcore. Raised in hell, so you have to expect certain political beliefs.
So
That's true. Yeah, hell is very libertarian. That's true.
Shit.
Wow, a lot of stances are taken.
Oh,
I
my
love
God.
So sandboxes.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I was going to suggest as we kind of come to an end here is,
It does feel like we're coming to an end.
as we start to drift towards hell libertarianism.
That's another thing about Sandbox, though, right? We've just kind of gone wherever the hell we wanted to in this podcast.
This whole conversation's been a sandbox.
Show you that.
Yeah, this
And
was
now
all
we
a
need to wrap it out.
demonstration.
Hell is other libertarians.
Or any.
But what I was thinking is that do you start or end a session with a little bit like of a bottleneck where you have a little bit like rails and then a sandbox and then back to a rail? So
Should we have a described speech for what you just said?
Yeah, so I started with my hands thin like a two parallel lines, and then I went into a big hug, and then I came back to two parallel lines.
Thank you.
So I'll say it really is going to depend, but largely no, because if the story demands it, sure, but if that's not a player focused thing, there's no sense in it. Personally,
Yeah, you gotta let it end where it ends. If your players are all like separated and doing weird antics, then that's just trying to rope all that into session on is just going to make the next session feel like, oh, well, we shouldn't continue what we were doing.
Right. Maybe not a session, but maybe thinking about like wrapping it up in a bow for a campaign. Does it ever just end, or is it like? I mean, I guess at some point you get to be like super powered, demigods or whatever, and then you're just like, yeah, now I
rule the universe.
Yeah, now I run this stronghold, and now we're playing a different game, and now let's start over.
Yeah, anything after like level 12 to
probably,
14 is like, if you don't put a bunch of crazy things in the world to sort of counter your players' powers, I think the Avengers said it best. Our power breeds conflict and challenge. You have to
Never heard of them.
Yeah, they're a little known band. You have to like keep bringing bigger and bigger things to your sandbox, which is going to make the sandbox really kind of unbelievable towards the end if you don't have an ending point.
well,
That's why your sandbox, all that big shit is like really far away from your starting town.
I will say though, as a sandbox, let it be little shit though, because it's a sandbox, and they should encounter all the tiny little things, and that can
To squish under
they can squish them,
booted
or they can
heel.
make that RP moment. It's okay. It's okay if it's little shit.
I will actually say that it makes you feel like having those moments are important to tell a story too, because like we were doing a game test of some new classes and everything, and there were some 9 hit pointed things, and I was a level 17, and I would just like walked into a room and just like immediately devoured all of their souls and like raised them as zombies, and I was like, this feels great.
Love starting a D&D game as a new game plus.
Yeah, and on that note, I think that we can bring this sandbox to a close. Playground's closed, everyone. Grab your toddler and let's get the hell out of here. Anything we want to talk about just to wrap up? Any plugs, anything like that?
No plugs, no productions in the pocket yet.
Amazing.
I'd like to plug Tabletop.
Me too. You
if
know
you
what?
haven't heard it, listen to it.
Yeah, Tabletopped is a great podcast. You can find it anywhere you get podcasts. We also have a Patreon at patreon.com/Tabletopped, and we have a Twitter at Tabletopped.
What can we find on the Patreon?
You can find behind the scenes content of Cornor/Daniel screwing up one of our first recordings we ever did. We also have some of the custom classes that Shade has made, and we have some artwork that Daniel has made as well.
Well, I'm officially boycotting the Patreon.
So if you're interested in that, come take a look. Also, if you would love to support the show, please leave a comment and a rating. I'm going to be reading one of those in the outro because we do that now. All right.
Bye.
Okay, bye. Go. What are you doing? Go make your choices. Go live your own sandbox. Jeez.
What are you doing in here?
We're not going to tell you what to do anymore.
Yeah, just go. Get out of here. Be free.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Tabletopped. This show is available wherever you get your podcasts. Tabletopped is supported by all of our amazing sponsors and listeners like you. You can check out our website at tabletoppedpod.com for links to our Patreon and Discord server. That's a free Discord server. Don't have to be a Patreon to join. We would love to talk to you. We also on our website have details on upcoming episodes and guests. So make sure to follow us there and on Twitter at Tabletopped. I would also love if people could rate and give a review to this podcast on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us get our show out there and reach people we might not otherwise. So in appreciation for those who already have actually left a review, I'm going to read one out now. This is from Miracle Haver TZ, and they said, I recently found this podcast and it's just fantastic. Really, super interesting. Engaging content and questions. I love the energy and good vibes that they bring to the podcast, and I am looking forward to getting through all of the backlog content. Thank you so much, Miracle Haver TZ. I really appreciate that you're going to go back and listen to all the episodes. Make sure to hit all of the guest episodes, because I think those conversations are super awesome, even if you are not familiar with tabletop games. All right, everyone, be like Miracle Haver TZ. Leave a review, and maybe, just maybe, you'll hear your review read out on the podcast in a future date. All right, thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next week for another episode of Tabletopped.